Fantastic. All right. Now we can begin. This is the beginning of me making no mistakes and having no technical difficulties. So we can begin. Hello, everyone. Welcome to How to Run a Phone Bank. So go ahead and throw any questions you have or any topics you want to make sure we cover tonight in the chat, and I will do my best to cover all of them. As I said, a few minutes ago, I think this is a topic that is really ripe for discussion because the reality is not everybody has positive associations with phone banking. So it's really on the host and on the leaders of the event to make sure that it's a positive experience, to manage expectations, to make sure that all the different leadership roles are filled so that people have a good calling experience. So yeah, let us know in the chat if you have questions and we'll get started. So a couple different things we're going to do. We're going to talk about some of the major questions and concerns that come up when we think about running a phone bank. And we'll maybe mention in the chat, or if people want to say verbally things that have gone well at phone banks they've attended in the past, what was good, and things that have not gone so well, especially on virtual ones, because I think, as we all know, all of us are in the organizing world through these different organizations, DSA, Streets for All, LA Forward, neighborhood councils, different organizing bodies. We go to a lot of virtual meetings these days, and we might be going to a lot of virtual phone banks, right? And not all of them are going to be as smoothly run as the others. And then we're also going to spend a little time talking about not just what you do at the event, but how to use debrief with callers, especially first-time callers, to help ensure that they return a second time. So we'll touch on that as well. Okay. So it looks like no one has questions at the top of their head. That's okay. What I'd like you to do is let me know in the chat if you have an example of a time when you were at a phone bank and something went well, and let me know what it was. So it could be something to do with the calls that you did. It could be something to do with the hosting of the event, but just something that went well, something that was positive. Yeah, I see that question, Lauren. That's a really good question. We'll definitely touch on that. I'll give you all a second to think about the time you've been to a phone bank. And for our purposes, you can think about a phone bank that's in person too, as well as virtual. Okay, so Alina said getting through a lot of voters. Yeah, which doesn't always happen. Did you want to elaborate any more on that, Alina? Why it was a positive experience?
Well, my first thought when you said to manage expectations when you host a phone bank was just to let people know that you may call for an hour and not talk to anyone. And so like phone banks that have been the most rewarding for me are the ones where people happen to answer the phone and I could actually talk to them. So that's why, and then you feel like you just feel like your time is well spent and you're actually doing what you set out to do,
Absolutely, yeah. And part of what we'll talk about tonight is some of our options that we have for dialing technology, and that can also determine what a volunteer caller's experience is. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think managing expectations is huge for sure. Ooh, a costume contest. I love that. The winner got home baked goods. That's great. And this was a virtual phone bank? Wow. I love that. And you pulled off a prize as well. Very cool. I love that. And Nadia shared calling and getting a whole family who was excited to vote in our favor. Fantastic. So lots of good examples. What about things that have not gone so well? Anything in particular that stands out to you at phone banks you've attended that could have been improved. And that could also include ones that you've hosted where you're thinking like, okay, I could have done that better. I'm not exactly sure how. Yeah, getting hangups is frustrating. Agitated voters for sure. A host who's unresponsive. Okay, interesting. Welcome, Faith. If you're just joining us, we're just brainstorming some things that have maybe not gone so well at phone banks in the past. Either phone banks we have attended rather or hosted. And then we're going to go through, how we set up events to go more smoothly. Interesting. So Alina brought up trainings for a specific dialer called TrueTalk. Lots of them not super effective. That's interesting. We're not going to touch on that too much today, but that's something I'm happy to work on with people who do end up hosting specific neighborhood council phone banks. In terms of making sure that you cover all the bullet points so people are set up for success. Yeah, so, hosts who maybe aren't trained in the right platform or changes are made. So I think there's kind of a couple different categories of challenges that people have. And one of those categories is the calls themselves. And there's a lot that we don't have control over with the calls, right? The other category is things we do have control over. So how we manage expectations, how we frame the event, how we frame the goals of the event, how we respond to questions, how we train people, that kind of thing. So that's what we'll focus on today, but I think it is important to bring up those concerns or those questions about, hey, people's calling experience isn't always positive. And that's totally fine. That's a normal part of phone banking, but how can we work with that and make sure they still have an experience where they think they're, where they feel they're being efficacious. Yeah, technical difficulties, really frustrating for sure. So moving right along, I want to talk a little bit about some of the decisions that we make around phone banks before hosting. And feel free, if you have a question, you can type stack in the chat, or you can type question, and I will stop for a second and you can unmute yourself and ask your question if that works for everybody. Or you can type the question in the chat if you don't want to forget. And Nadia, my assistant, thank you, Nadia, will alert me to your question. So let's talk for a second about recruitment. Just touching on a couple bullet points of, what do you want your event to look like? How many callers do you want? In general, you're going to expect about 40 to 50%, sometimes more, but I think around half typically of your RSVPs are going to flake. So they won't show up. That's totally normal. We all know life happens. I think sometimes the flake rate for virtual events can be higher because when you sign up for a virtual event, it's so easy. Like you just get the link delivered to your email or it's on your calendar. And it kind of feels like there's less investment. At the same time, I think we've probably all experienced like it's easier to hop onto a virtual event last minute, right? So it kind of works both ways in this virtual time. A couple things I would definitely suggest. I think it was Alina who brought up the concept of having more informal events, like phone bank events where you're inviting your friends and family. I think that's a really good idea because, as we know, those are the people you have relationships with. They're the people who are most likely to actually come, right? So if you call up strangers, like if you're in DSA and you call up fellow DSA members, yeah, they have something in common with you, but if they don't know you personally, they're not going to be as likely to show up than as your partner, your kids, your parents, your neighbors, your friends, your classmates, etc. So those are the best people to invite, right? People you know. And in particular, if you're running for neighborhood council, I'm not going to say you should guilt trip your friends into making calls for you, but get your friends excited about this opportunity. And the other thing too is I know many folks who are running for neighborhood council at least some people on this call have calculated kind of their win number, right? Or the amount of voters they want to reach. So that's another good motivator for talking to your friends and getting people to show up. It's like, hey, I need 50 people to vote for me and my slate in order for us to win, right? Do you want to come help make calls so that you can help contribute to some of those votes, produce some of those votes? Any questions about recruitment or planning of the event? Got a thumbs up from Katie. That's good. Let's see. I can't see everyone. I'll cycle through your photos. The other thing I'll say about recruitment.
I was going to say,
what'd you say?
Do you want to touch on what are good time blocks to aim for when planning your events?
Yes, very, very good call. So in terms of times, there's a couple things to consider. And the first one is, when is the best time to call the people you're trying to reach? And in general, the best time would be evenings or weekends. But that may differ based on the demographic you're trying to reach. So for instance, if you're trying to reach people who are older on average, you might actually be able to reach them during the day, right? We've also found, I'm sure folks on this call have experienced this who've done phone banking. It's different right now, right? When we're on lockdown, unless people are essential workers who are leaving their house to work, we're at home, right? So you might be able to reach people more. It also depends, landlines versus cell phones. But typically, I think the best times for a phone bank are like 5 to 8 p.m. or 6 to 8 p.m. Depends on how much call time you want and whether you want to have a break in the middle. I also think on the subject of weekends, Sunday nights are a really good time. I'm not exactly sure why. Just people are at home kind of preparing for the week. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up, Nadia. Let's see. Lauren, can you explain your question in the chat? I was just trying to get a sense of what you meant by what benefits for the volunteer.
Can I verbalize it, or do you want me to write it?
Oh yeah, you can verbalize it. Yeah, go for it.
So whenever I'm trying to persuade someone to do a thankless task, I try and come up with a way to motivate them. All right. And this is with the understanding that I have done some recon and have an idea or an insight into what might motivate that person. And if I've spent any quality of time with them, that's easier to do rather than if I do a more broad recruitment. And in that case, with a broader recruitment, taking in, especially if I need more hands on deck, figuring out what is the 1 or 2 ways to persuade them to give up their afternoon, do phone banking after a hard day at work, especially in a virtual environment. I've found with the way they got me was the camaraderie, but we were all in a bunch of tables. We were working together. There were copious snacks, and we were on the same mission. And it was the mission that attracted me. But the person who recruited me spent time getting to know me to assess me that way. And now when it's virtual, you may, almost exclusively virtual as far as I know, you may not have that advantage. So that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Lauren. I love that you brought that up. And I think you're right. I think the sense of camaraderie and sense of shared mission and collective purpose when you're in person and there are other people all around you who are also talking to people they've never talked to before on the phone, right? How freaky is that? And you can hear people ring a bell when they get a supporter, and you can hear it like ringing, echoing in the room, ding, 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 all the supporters of the, candidate or ballot measure or whatever. It's really powerful. So I think part of what we're trying to do with these virtual phone banks is create some of that atmosphere as much as possible virtually. And I think it is possible. It's not perfect, but we try. But I like that you brought that up about how to persuade people. I think that's a really good point. So yeah, we can continue to think about that throughout. The last thing I'll add is doing confirmation calls. So this is just a general, best practice for any kind of field event, whether it's canvassing, phone bank, whatever, to make individual confirmation calls the day before your event, and then send follow-up texts. Don't need to leave a voicemail. Most people don't check their voicemail if there's no answer. And there's a couple benefits to doing confirmation calls. The first benefit is it decreases the likelihood that person is going to flake out on the event. Even if you don't reach them by phone, just them getting that personal text is great. And then the second thing is you can ask them if they've phone banked before, and you can kind of make a note like, okay, this might be someone who's going to struggle with tech, right? Maybe they need a breakout room with someone who's really patient, good at going through the technology, to share their screen and walk them through it. No problem, right? Okay, moving right along. So another thing you need to figure out when you're planning a phone banking event is how you're going to make calls, right? So there's basically three main options. I'm not going to go too into depth on these, but I can answer some questions. The first option is manual. So basically you type out the number, or you dial the number, whatever, hold the phone to your ear, wait for it to ring, et cetera, make the call, and then hang up and go to the next call. And this is also known as virtual phone bank, which is one voter or volunteer management system that does it, called VPB. This is fine. It's good. It's a slower method. This is good if your list is small, or if you don't have a budget to get a faster dialer. Your callers are not going to have very many conversations per hour, and that's totally fine. But this also plays into managing expectations, right? And kind of giving people a sense of what they're going to experience. I think this can be a totally good method in many ways. There's lots of cool things about it. You can have the voters' information appear, like their district or their party or their age. And you can have the script right there so people see it, and it's pretty easy to set up. I'll go through the other methods, and then if people have questions, I'm happy to touch on that as well. The next step up from manual dialing or virtual phone bank would be one of two options. There's one called the Hub Dialer, and there's another one called Call Evo. And these are basically dialers where you are uploading a spreadsheet or like a CSV file of phone numbers to the service. And with Hub Dialer, you set it up yourself. With Call Evo, an administrator of the system or like a rep will set it up for you. And with these, you're able to call a little bit faster. So with Hub Dialer, you're able to do what is called preview dialing, which means you use your AirPods or headphones, whatever, and you click start call, and you get connected through the computer. So instead of punching in the number on your cell phone, you're connected through the computer. There's probably people on this call who've used Hub Dialer for sure. So that's slightly faster than dialing by hand. And the other thing I should have mentioned at the outset with this topic is that in California, it's illegal for us to automatically dial cell phone numbers. So that's why all these different systems exist, to help us get around that, right? So we can manually dial cell phone numbers. But if we want to call them with the dialer, we basically have to have someone click to connect us. And this is getting into the weeds a little bit, so I won't touch too much on this, but I know some people find it interesting. Basically, you have to have someone on your team of volunteers or staff who is hitting click, click, click to connect each caller to each cell phone number. And you don't have to do that for landlines. For landlines, you can automatically dial them. So anyways, I'll leave that there. If you have questions, happy to return to that. So Hub Dialer and Call Evo are kind of in that range of a bit faster than Virtual Phone Bank. They do cost money. And, you know, I'm not going to go into the pricing too much tonight, but if anyone has questions or would like to be, you know, connected to, you know, reps from any of these companies to ask questions or follow up further with me one-on-one, I'm happy to sit down and talk to you about it. TrueTalk is the method that we're going to be using for the neighborhood council phone banking. And TrueTalk is basically, it's kind of like the Cadillac of dialers. It's fancy in a good way. It allows us to automatically dial landlines and cell phones. And the reason for that is they have people all across the country who are going click, click, click. You don't have to have volunteers do it. They are manually clicking to connect those calls. So I'll stop there. Does anyone have questions about any of these options? I know it's a bit technical. Yeah, Lauren.
Who manually clicks in TrueTalk?
Samuel, we'll go to Lauren and then I'll take your question, okay?
So is TrueTalk, I'm sorry, can I speak now? Okay, great. Of the three that you've listed, well, I should say, is the one that is going to be used for this project similar in any way to Van?
Are you referring to like the virtual phone bank where the person's phone number pops up and you call them on your cell phone?
Yes.
It's
Or
not.
on
So
the
this
laptop,
is going to be,
and then
yeah, this is a bit different. So this one will automatically connect to you. So you wait on the line and you'll hear a ding, and then the person's information will appear on the left-hand side of the screen, and the script will appear on the right-hand side. And then you have the conversation, you hit hang up, and then you wait a few seconds, and then you hear a ding, and you get connected to another person. It's a bit different. It requires some getting used to, but it's very cool.
thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And one other thing I'll say about TrueTalk allows us to have like 10 to 15 more conversations per volunteer or like per phone bank than we would with manual dialing. So it's much, much faster. You can have multiple conversations in an hour. You know, you can identify a bunch of supporters for your candidate or ballot measure or project over the course of an event. So it's really positive for people's volunteer experience. But of course, on the other hand, you know, it does cost money. Samuel, let's go to you.
Am I muted now? I'm all right now?
You're good, Sam.
Okay. I know it takes a volunteer to do click click in the hub dialer, but in TrueTalk, what does it take to click? Because I never was in that situation. I always used it. I never actually was the one who clicked to bring a caller to cell phone. It'd be interesting. I don't know how it can be done, but I know I'm not into neighborhood councils because there are too many problems this country as a whole. I'm just waiting for there's a phone bank to abolish the filibuster, and that is where I have to focus. But I would, when country gets a little better order, when the Trumpism departs, then I could help you with the clicking. But if it's something large, I could try to keep the House democratic with the Senate.
I'm just going to cut you off, Samuel,
I want to make
sure we get to everybody's questions. But I hear you. There's lots of stuff to work on.
But
Definitely
I need to
lots of
does the clicking in TrueTalk.
Yeah. So I want to answer that question for sure because it's a good question. TrueTalk actually pays staff all across the country to do the clicking for you. So that's one of the reasons why it's a little bit pricier. It costs it's 5 cents per dial. So yeah, they actually pay people to sit at their computer and manually connect to you by clicking. So volunteers or staff don't have to do it. Yeah, thanks for the question. And then Matthew had another good question in the chat, which was, are these all routed through the individual caller's local phone number? Very good question, Matthew. The answer is no. So with manual calls or virtual phone bank, people could either use their personal phone number or they could use Google Voice to set up a phone number that is, separate or private in a way. Like, if they're working for a campaign in a particular area, they might want to get a Google Voice number that has that area code. But if folks are using Hub Dialer, Call Evo, or ThruTalk, they will not be using their own phone number. So it depends on the system. Sometimes you purchase a phone number to use. Other times you can just change it yourself to a Google Voice number. Yeah, cool. Okay, moving right along.
Lauren had one more question.
Oh yeah, is it per connected dial or any? Yeah, when you say connected, Lauren, I'm not sure what you mean. Like
The
a conversation?
person on whose number is being dialed answers. Because sometimes if it's voicemail,
conversation.
the spam is blocked, the call. Other times it won't pick up at all. I've had this experience, regrettably, as someone on a phone bank. And so I'm wondering if it's like real spam. If you don't get a pickup, they just move on to the next one. I'm imagining you're charged either way.
Yeah, I believe so. I'm a little new to doing the administration for ThruTalk, doing the admin work, but I'm pretty sure it's any dial. And they try to screen out answering machines when they're connecting you, but sometimes they get it wrong. That's my understanding, but they're pretty darn good at the screening. Yeah, good question. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about like staffing your phone bank, whether that's with volunteers or potentially if you work for an organization that has staff, could be a combination. This is something that I have really when we were talking about things that have gone poorly in phone banks, when I think about like my phone bank horror stories or whatever, which I try not to think about because it's upsetting, those bad phone banks. But, when I reflect on that a little bit, I think the thing that often does not go well, if there is something that does not go well, is not having clear roles. And a lot of people touched on this in their notes in the chat about, for instance, the person doing the tech training, maybe to no fault of their own, was trained in the wrong technique, wrong method. Or, the host was unresponsive and it was hard to get a hold of them during the event. Maybe they weren't, guided, trained to do that. So I'm going to run through, this is how I would staff or kind of set up a phone bank with volunteers. And I'm happy to take any input in the chat if people have questions as well. So the first role that I would typically set up is a host. And, a host is someone to welcome attendees. There's someone to introduce speakers if you have any speakers, maybe to get people motivated or excited about the issue or candidate. The host is someone who can introduce people like the tech trainer who will run through the calling training on how to use the dialing system. And that's basically it, simple role. Chat is a very simple role as well. This is a good way to bring someone in who maybe hasn't run a phone bank before, right? Maybe they don't know the first thing about doing a tech training, but they can post key links in the chat. A sign-in sheet, a dialer login page, maybe your link tree if you have one for your campaign or your project. They can also post emojis in the chat during the calling, right? One of the things that I think it was Lauren, maybe others touched on, is having that sense of camaraderie and rapport and excitement when you're in an in-person event like a phone bank. And I feel that very deeply because I think a lot of my earlier experiences of hosting these events was in person. And you can really create that sense of rapport, and you're kind of darting around, I'm darting around the room if I'm hosting, and I'm going, how are your calls going, Nadia? How are your calls going, Alina? How are your calls going, Samuel? And so on. And it's really kind of electrifying the number of conversations people are having, right? To kind of create that when you're virtual, you can keep the chat lit, as the kids say, right? Keep the chat exciting. Keep the chat exciting, ask people to post stories of positive calls, teach them how to put emojis in the chat, and they can post a bell as if they're ringing a bell every time they get a supporter. It sounds silly. It may sound like, what's the point? Trust me, it makes a difference. When people see that they're being celebrated for having a good call in the chat, it makes a difference, even though it is virtual. And the other thing that the chat person can be available for is to answer questions that come up in the chat, particularly if you have a large event. Like if you've got 50 people making calls, it can be kind of overwhelming to have 50 people on a Zoom who have a lot of questions that are coming at you, particularly if you're doing something like Hub Dialer or Through Talk, where there might be technical challenges for new callers. You want to have people available in the chat to answer questions, and people are going to have a much smoother calling experience when that's available. Yes, very Pavlovian, love it. The tech trainer, usually when I run a phone bank for a campaign or any kind of organizing, the person who sets up the back end of the phone bank, so setting up the script, setting up the data, making sure everything looks right on the back end, is also the person who can share their screen and run through how to make a couple calls, or run through a quick slideshow on how to log in, how to use the dialing system, that kind of thing. This is a really important role. I think making sure you're touching on the right bullet points of the dialing system is extremely important. And you can kind of fine tune it as you go if you're going to host multiple events. And then the last role, again, really simple, the Zoom Maestro. I think I stole this from another organizer who was calling it Zoom host. And then they were like, let's change it to Maestro. That's better. So that's just someone who, hosts the Zoom in the literal sense of doing screen sharing, maybe creating breakout rooms if it's necessary, playing music at the beginning. Again, this is a way to level someone up, bring them in, make them a lead on the event. Does not have to be complicated, and give them a sense of ownership. Does anyone have any questions about any of these roles, or anything that you think is missing or that you would add? And I know part of this depends on, okay, how many people do you have available to help run the event? But I think things like, keeping the chat exciting or being the Zoom Maestro are really easy ways to bring people into that.
So I have an ad. With these roles, I just want to also say that having the extra person, even if it is just one extra person for the first 15 minutes to a half hour of the event is so great. So that's a great way to get people to kind of co-host with you, is that saying, just help me set up the event, get through the training, get through the questions. And then once everything's settled, then they can hop off, and it's a lot easier to maintain. So that's a great way to introduce people into hosting and recruit them to maybe host themselves too, or just get them to stay on and continue to phone bank with you.
I love that. And, I also mentioned the idea of, in perfect timing, we're going into Nadia's exciting slide. I also mentioned the concept of having a tech breakout room for people who need more tech help. I highly recommend this if you're going to have a large virtual phone bank, 30 people, 50 people, 60 people, right? I've been on virtual phone banks with 75 people or 100 people. You should absolutely have someone available who knows the tech system frontwards and backwards and is really patient and good at explaining, like maybe a teacher might be good for this. They sit in the breakout room, and the Zoom Maestro, who communicates with the tech trainer or other people in the chat, can then send people who need tech help to that breakout room where the tech help person can help them out. So I really recommend that just as a division of labor. That way you don't have people, let's say if someone, for instance, they need to be in Chrome and they're in Safari or Firefox. It's an easy fix, but for someone who is less tech savvy in using the internet or whatever, no biggie, they might need more help on it. So you can help walk them through, and then great, that person has that positive experience and they come back for another phone bank. I've also seen that when people get that one-on-one tech help that results in them being able to make calls, they come back for more as well. Okay, let's go to Nadia. Nadia's going to share some tips for how to spice up your event, maybe with a theme.
Hi guys. I'm so glad that Lauren brought up like what's in it for the volunteers. How do we get these people who maybe we don't have a personal relationship with to come and have a good experience? And that's, I think, where the host really plays a huge role, is planning the event, making it fun and making it different, because there's so many different choices to phone bank to. And there's so many different causes going on, as Samuel talked about. So this is a really good way to get people attracted and wanting to phone bank with you, stay on for the whole time of the phone bank, because we've had issues with drop-offs before, and get them to come back and bring friends. So over the 2020 election, when we were phone banking for Prop 15 and Measure J, we came up with these really fun themes. So every single phone bank was a different theme. We had a bring a date theme. We had a Halloween dress up theme, which sounds like somebody else did as well. And it was fun because we had a playlist that was themed that went along with the theme. And we encouraged people to stay on and stay in the Zoom chat and share all of their wins, share all of their frustrations. So it did really build up that camaraderie. And I want to point out that there were times where there'd be really funny, cheesy jokes running in the chat that were like sometimes inspired by the themes. And it was a great way for people to connect, build some trust and new friendships. I joined LA Forward in the virtual age, basically. So most of these people I've never met in real life, but I feel like they're like my closest friends just from the hours of phone banking that we spent together in planning these events. So these are fun little backgrounds that a team member had made. We sent them out along with the Zoom link to everyone who had confirmed or signed up. I would call them to confirm. So let's say I was calling Hannah and I'd be like, hey, Hannah, like I'm just confirming you for the Halloween party. What are you going to be? And then I'd be like, I'm so excited to see your ghost costume. Did you get my background? You're going to be a clown. Great. Did you get my background? I'm so excited to see you. If you need help knowing how to put it up on the Zoom, let me know. And then talk about I'm going to be a skeleton and I don't know how to do my makeup yet. And just make that friendship connection, even if they are someone you've never met before. It's kind of a way in, instead of just being like, hey, can you come help out? So it's just a way to build that friendship and build that, say we're counting on you to be there. I made this slide, I sent it to you, I plugged it in, can't wait to see you tomorrow. So it is more of an ownership. And then I found that we had less people flake when it was tied to an event, because they were planning on it and excited about it. And then I also got them to bring friends, especially with the bring the date theme. So I highly encourage that one. Bring a date, bring a friend, best friend day, go wild, be creative. It's really fun. Does anybody have any questions about it? Even in my confirmation text, I would send a picture of all my makeup mess and be like, I'm practicing my makeup for Saturday. Hope you're getting ready too. Can't wait to see you. And then of course, confirming did any questions come up, anything you're nervous about, I'm here for you. and and ask them just to, just be accessible the whole time. I think that's all I have to say about themes. Anything that I missed, Hannah, or any questions?
I don't think so. I mean, people can definitely ask questions in the chat. Also, I was just going to say how fun it is to see these Measure J backgrounds and know that we passed Measure J. It's really, it's pretty special.
Yeah.
And you and other people on this call, I'm sure, were part of that. Yeah, thanks for being here, Katie. Take care. And you can also follow up with me. I'll send out my email if you have any questions too. Good to have you. The other thing I was going to say about the whole theme thing is this is one of those things where when you're suggesting themes to people, like let's do a theme phone bank, people you're working with, other volunteers might be like, yeah, okay, all right, okay, kind of weird. But when they actually see it, it's one of those social things. And I'm trying to think of another example, like, we should do karaoke, or we should, it's like when you're the first person to suggest something and then people kind of need to see it to believe it. This is one of those things. It's almost like if you're a camp counselor, you need to just be zany and silly, and then kids will be zany and silly. Hosting a virtual phone bank is the exact same thing. I can't emphasize that enough. It's like, you can be silly, you can be charismatic, you can really clown around in the chat. I was on a phone bank this past weekend when the host put on a different funny hat every time someone had a positive call. It was really silly. I was skeptical at first, but it was cute. And people remembered it when we did the debrief calls. They were like, well, there's this host who made me feel like it was kind of an event because he had all these costumes. And I was like, okay, there you go. So,
yeah. I was just going to add that, like, sometimes it could just be as simple as a themed playlist that you play in the back that the callers can choose to listen to. So I remember I did like a 90s hip hop call, and everybody was like dropping song recommendations. And because when you're hosting, you're not calling. I don't know if we touched on that, because you want to be accessible to everybody else who's calling so that you can be responsive if they have a question. So you're monitoring the chat, you're ready and available for them. And I just remember, like, people would get, like, at first do song requests. And then I was like, okay, there's so many song requests. If you get ID, which is a yes, then you get a song played. And that, like, gave people so much excitement to do it. So, if themes kind of freak you out or you feel like it's a lot, you can start small with something as simple as music. And then do little dance breaks too, to celebrate each other, or just to stretch your legs and break up if you're doing like a 3-hour session, maybe halfway through. Elena, you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, I like the themed playlist idea a lot. And you said if callers choose to listen to it, how do you deal with the, like, listening to music and making calls? Do people just disconnect their computer audio if they don't want to hear what's going on in the Zoom, or how do you navigate that?
That's a good question. So they would just, depending on what system they were calling through, like what, if we were doing, because we did have dialer, and we just did Evo. We did call Evo too, which are two different things. They could turn off the audio on Zoom. So if they wanted to, or I know people would turn it on so they could listen to music, and then when they would get a pickup, they would turn it off so that they could have that conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing I'll just add about Zoom backgrounds, and then we can kind of move on, although I love this topic, I could talk about it for hours, themes, is that when you do a Zoom background, that gives you a group photo. So, I think we're all kind of used to seeing screenshots of people on Zoom, and it's cute in a way, but if everyone has a Zoom background, or they have a variety of different ones that have your candidate in it, or that show your neighborhood council slate, in the background, and you can make these on Canva for free. You get a cute little screenshot out of that, and people like that, right? They like to share that on social media. They like to have that, and it's a cute little memory. I want to talk briefly about managing people's expectations. So this has come up earlier in our conversation. I think this is so huge for working on campaigns in general. And I almost see this as almost akin to sports, right? Like if you're coaching a sports team and, you know, you're coaching like kids soccer, right? And the kids expect that they're going to score 20 goals. Well, they're going to be crying after the game, right? They're probably not going to be scoring 20 goals, right? They may score, you know, this is not a great metaphor, but work with me here. They may score 1 or 2 goals, you know, once in a while, right? And that would be helping manage their expectations, right? As well as setting those ambitious goals. With phone banking, you know, part of managing expectations is normalizing that they're going to have negative calls. That's fine. It's not a reflection of them. It's not personal. Maybe they caught that person right after their kid had spilled grape juice all over their favorite white shirt, right? Maybe they, you know, we've probably all had calls where we caught someone in the middle of their toddler having a meltdown, right? How stressful. You get a call from someone and your toddler's having a meltdown, right? So, you know, that's part of managing expectations is not taking it personally. And the other thing to keep in mind, right, is that there's no shortcuts. The only way to have conversations and to have hundreds of conversations or thousands of conversations with voters or people you want to reach is to have hundreds of conversations with people you want to reach. You know, it's the only way. There's no way around it, right? And we have other means of contacting voters. We can knock on their doors. We can text them. But phone banking is unique in the sense that it allows us to talk to many more people than we would canvassing. Right, the contact rate is higher if we're using something like ThruTalk, that's an automatic dialer. But people can do it from their own homes, and especially now, it's, you know, it's COVID safe as well. So I think the no shortcuts piece is really huge. Just letting people know, being real with them that, you know, if we had a way to do this without phone calls, you know, we would, but we don't. This is one of our best methods, so we got to use it. Any questions about managing expectations? I think it's an important topic. The other thing I was going to add is that in the Zoom chat, you can really get a sense of people's experiences, right? So when they have a positive call or negative call, they'll share that in the chat, and that's an opportunity for you to validate their experience. Oh man, that sucks. You had a negative call. It's not personal. Happens to me all the time. All things that are true, right? You're not sugarcoating it. But you're almost like neutralizing that in a way where it's like, okay, but we're on to the next call, right? It doesn't mean that experience didn't happen, but we are trying to help motivate people and mobilize them to do more, you know, to help us win our campaign or whatever it may be. So, you know, it is important to get people back to the goal at hand. The other thing is that even if they haven't had a bunch of positive calls, if they see that other people are, right, hopefully that's a motivator as well, for them to see that what they're doing is impactful, even if they happen to have hit a bunch of answering machines or wrong numbers in a row. Just want to talk briefly about a sample agenda for how a phone bank could go. And I set this up as if it's a 2-hour event. I think this is sort of an average length that I see, or that I tend to plan for a phone bank. We can also talk about if we want to do a longer event with maybe a break in the middle. But this is sort of a typical schedule that I would set up. And this basically assumes that you have you know, a few volunteers who are filling those roles that I mentioned. So first 5 minutes, callers arrive, the host welcomes them and asks for everyone to introduce themselves in the chat. If you have a small group, they can introduce themselves out loud, share why they're there, their neighborhood, you know, what brings them to the campaign, what brings them to the project, are they running for neighborhood council or whatever it may be. And then after you've given people time to settle in and have them sign in some way, you want to give a little context on the types of calls they're going to be making. And I'll give you an example of why this is important. So on a campaign I worked on once, we had callers come to a phone bank, and it was actually a media phone bank. MTV came and covered the event, which was extremely exciting. If only MTV would cover all of our phone banks, that would perk us up. But the callers, they hopped on the dialer, and this was on me. Okay, I was the host. So to be clear, whose fault it was, this was on me. I thought they were going to be making voter ID calls, which, just like Nadia alluded to, this is when you're identifying supporters of a particular candidate or ballot measure. In fact, the calls they were making were actually persuasion. So they were expected to kind of stay on the phone a bit longer, go through the script, and really try to move that voter on the phone, which is a bit more advanced in the sense that it requires you to push them a little bit. So that's, an example of a time where you got to give people that context. Take about 10 minutes or so and do tech training. So that's when the person who set up the back end of the phone bank would offer some slides or a screen share on that. And then in this 2-hour phone bank, you want to give people a solid hour at least, if not hour and a half, to make calls. But during this time, highly recommend that everyone stays on Zoom. Ideally with their video on, although I understand sometimes that's a lot to ask for people. So everyone should stay on Zoom. And the reason for that is people will stop making calls if they're not required to stay on Zoom. And that goes for the vast majority of people, right? And you can see on the back end of a phone bank who's actually been making calls. I don't mean in a punitive way, like, Nadia, you haven't been making your calls, but it does give you a sense of, okay, maybe people are feeling less motivated, or they're feeling tired, maybe they need a break in the middle, etc. So with that, people can leave the computer audio, stay on Zoom, stay in the chat, keep it exciting, and share when they have positive calls. And then another really key part that I highly recommend you do is a debrief. And the debrief is a key aspect of managing expectations and making sure that, increasing the likelihood that people will return, right? Yeah, and that's basically it for the sample agenda. Anyone have questions about it? Yeah, Lauren.
So, my gut instinct is that the requirement to stay on Zoom might have less of a accountability effect than a "this is not for me" effect or impact. I think that requirements like that, it seems to me, well, let me just say, if that were something demanded of me, I'd drop out. And I think there has to be some way of achieving the goal of this accountability without appearing to overstep people's boundaries. Requirements of volunteers, unless you're dealing with minors, is really got to be negotiable, in my view. And I'm curious if that is really successful, and if there's a retention rate of volunteers, or, I would anticipate a lot of people dropping out. They might stay for the rest of the session and you'll never see them again. For the debrief, I think the, getting people to come back is maybe the second thing. What I always look for in a debrief, whatever I'm working on, is troubleshooting. And that includes people's level of comfort, how they felt, were they supported. These are things that I want to enhance and expand participation. And so for me, that would be the number one purpose of the troubleshooting. And because I think, and it's my kind of management style, that if I show that I'm interested in your feedback, that's the key to getting you to return.
Totally. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I think that's good input. Yeah, I will say regarding asking people to stay on Zoom, like I said, asking them to be on video, of course, it is too much and people don't have to do that. I do think asking people to stay on Zoom is the right call for a couple different reasons that are related. The first one is, well, number one, I would never say we require you to stay on Zoom. You know, I would never frame it like that. I would say something like, okay, we're going to get started with our calls now. We're all going to stay on Zoom. That way we can share our experiences in the chat and see how many people are making calls at the same time, just like we would if we are in a room together, ringing a bell every time we get a supporter, so we can kind of feel that energy. And, you know, as I said, can you feel the energy in the same way in a Zoom as you can when you're in a room with 30 people or 60 people? No, of course not. But if people leave the phone bank, leave the Zoom, most of those people are not going to make calls. Some might. Most of those people are not going to make calls, and most of those people are not going to return for the debrief. That's what I've experienced in my time doing this. So that's why that's, you know, my recommendation. And the other thing too is when people are doing this virtually, like, it's not just accountability, you know. I mean, I think you're spot on, Lauren. It's like people need to feel that they're a part of something where their feedback matters. So getting their feedback in real time, you know, in the chat as they're making calls, I think is valuable. And the other thing is if you recruit a bunch of people, right? So if you recruit 50 people, right? When people feel that they're making calls with 50 people virtually, and they all have the same virtual background, and, you know, people don't all have to be on video, of course, but let's say they all have the same virtual background, everyone who's on video, and you can see people making their calls in the chat. They're saying every time they get a supporter. I think it does make a difference as opposed to having them leave the Zoom. But I totally understand. We don't want people to feel like it's mandatory. But I think there is a way to kind of like make clear that that's the expectation in a way that's not negative. It's just, you know, lots of reasons for it. Yeah, Alina.
I would just add to that as well that if you're a new phone banker, or maybe just new to like whatever software is being used for the particular phone bank, then it's helpful to like have a way to come back and ask a question, you know, if you're having an issue, because the host will be waiting, you know, is always on the Zoom throughout the whole phone bank. So I think also like including that in the pitch, right? Like, go make your calls and then you can come back and check in every like 15 minutes if you want, or you can come back and ask any questions and that sort of thing. I find helpful. At the same time, I totally get it, Lauren. I'm not a new phone banker, and I oftentimes will be like, I don't have 2 hours to do it today. I'm just gonna like show up, do an hour and leave, and I'm not gonna make a big deal about it because I'm gonna also do it tomorrow and the next day and whatever. And in that case, I won't be on the Zoom the whole time. And I think like that's not what, you know, everyone ultimately is gonna do whatever works for them anyway, you know.
Totally.
I also just wanted to add, like with my experience hosting people who would come back, like maybe their first phone bank, they would stay on the Zoom, but they would turn their camera off. When they would come back again, they would start turning their cameras on, because as most of us veteran phone bankers know, we might call for 3 hours and get like 7 pickups, and that's like a good day. So seeing people's cats walk across the screen, dogs pop up, my kids would run in, like it just gives a little bit of a breakup to the day, and then, or to the time. And then it kind of, like Hannah says, creates that room. So you'll see that, like when I was hosting, I would try to get like 1 or 2 friends to also be on, because I knew that they were like in it with me and would create that environment, and then more people would engage. So even if people feel a little bit hesitant to turn their cameras on, like most of the time, the second time they come back, they would turn their cameras on. And even if they left half the way through, all of us could be like waving at them and stuff, and like doing the dance breaks and all that stuff, having the cameras on. It really helps build that environment. So really selling that, and then being like, you know, if you don't want to have your cameras on, then that's fine too, but I'm going to be silly and you're probably going to meet my kids or see all my houseplants when like there's light in here or something, you know? So it just kind of helps.
Yeah, I think I think Alina's point about people doing what they're going to do, and what meets their needs is a good one, for sure. But yeah, I agree, Nadia, definitely. I did a series of phone banks with DSA in support of Prop 15, and we had speakers. So we had Nina Turner at one of our phone banks. I think we had maybe 100 people on that one. And it felt like I was in a room on that phone bank with 100 people also making calls for Prop 15. Everyone had their phone bank. Everyone was wearing, red or their union shirt if they were in a union. And the chat was just like buzzing, right? So we were able to create that. Of course, not every phone bank's going to have Nina Turner. That's totally fine. But maybe you could get someone to play a song. Maybe they play piano. Maybe they play piano during a phone bank break. I've seen that as well. It's really cute. People don't expect it, just to kind of break it up and make it feel like more of an event. Because I think people have a certain idea of what they're getting into with the phone bank. And if you can spice that up a bit, you're already way ahead of the game. Lauren's point about the importance of debrief as a way to have people feel that their feedback matters and that you're listening for it, I think was well taken. And I'll add as well, and then we can wrap up and take questions before we head out tonight. One-on-one debrief calls with people who have phone banked with you for the first time is a really, really good way to do a couple different things. Number one, you get feedback that you can use to make the next event better, right? So asking them things like, did the tech training actually answer all your questions? Were there any things you kept running into in the script that didn't make sense? How did the calls feel? Did you feel prepared? Did you feel knowledgeable? Did you feel excited? Knowing of course that we can't solve all these problems, right? If they felt like the calls were boring, well, we might not be able to solve that. We still might be able to get them to return if they feel a sense of obligation. Much of this organizing work we do is around a sense of duty as well as a sense of hope, of course. But we're getting that good feedback, asking them maybe what improvements we could make. And then, we can make an ask and say, can we count on you to join us again, right? Because we know that in order to reach, if we're trying to reach 100 people, we have to call 1,000 people. And if we're trying to reach thousands of people or millions of people, we have to call, exponentially more. I think it's easy for people to look at this concept of a hard ask or recruitment as manipulative in a way. And I totally understand why it would feel like that. You're trying to get something out of them to take action. I think that's fair, but I also look at it in a different way as well. And I think both are true at the same time. And this other perspective on it is that when someone does something like this repeatedly, they have a very rich, meaningful experience because they are talking to hundreds, potentially thousands of voters on a specific issue or about a specific candidate. And they're talking to people that they're never going to meet, sometimes in a different state. And it is the cumulative experience rather than one particular event that is actually meaningful for them. So in a way, I think with phone banking, you're trying to create that cumulative experience. Most people are not going to have that by coming to one phone bank. You're trying to create a certain type of virtual event that they're going to return to over and over again. And after they've phone banked, 3 times or 5 times, they have a certain sense of it. So yeah, those are my 2 cents about those calls. And yeah, that's all. I'll take any questions, anything I didn't touch on, and then we can wrap up, and I'll send you on your merry way. Does anyone have any questions?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Because there should be a raised hand. We should make that a point when you ask a question. The thing with me is I can't stay on the Zoom. I never stay on the Zoom because I'm only allotted 18 gigs of hotspot a month. I have money to do some webinars, and others I have to use my cell phone because I'm trying to save money. It costs much more money to deal with video than with audio. So that's the problem. I do not want to cater to the monopolies of cable companies. I stay on hotspot because those cable companies are so greedy, they gobbled up other cable companies.
Right.
And Wi-Fi in the early stages, when I was still people were getting together, I didn't have that restriction. You know, could have been able.
Yeah.
To,
Tricky.
When I was at, for example, Grassroots Dems headquarters, and I was on Wi-Fi, I could have stayed on a phone bank, but of course we're phone banking together in those days.
Right. Different, yeah.
And the thing is, and I think there's one other thing. In the beginning of the phone bank, you mentioned this types, the VPB, and there's also PDI, and that's the same kind of phone bank. Grassroots.
Yeah, the manual, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And people should talk about how all these participants, lastly, I should say, all the participants should say how they began phone banking, what their experience at the very beginning of phone banking was. Why don't we do that? Go around and talk about how they discovered phone banking at the very beginning.
Yeah, at the beginning of the event, people sharing how much experience they have.
Not the beginning of the event, when they first phone banked for the very first time.
Ah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that could work. I think asking people to share that way, it gives you a sense of who's in the room. Maybe you have 30 people and 10 of them are new. Okay, maybe you have a tech breakout room with those 10 people. Yeah, I think that's good input. And I totally hear you. Sometimes there's restrictions. People can't stay on the Zoom.
I didn't even own a cell phone when I went to my first phone bank. And there was
Gotcha. Okay.
I used a landline at the Grassroots Dem headquarters. It wasn't until 2019 that I actually was using cell phones.
Yeah, I hear you. So there's lots of different ways to do it for sure. And yeah, I'm glad that you've been doing it in all those different techniques. Any other questions that people have or comments?
I guess I just wanted to add, because earlier you asked us at the beginning about our best, positive experiences and negative experiences with phone banks we've attended. And a couple stick out to me that were just so painful that I left. I was like, I'm going to find a different way I set aside this time this afternoon to phone bank, and I'm going to phone bank, but it's not going to be through what I thought it was, because the event was so disorganized. Like, it took so long to get going. Everyone was just kind of hanging out. The host didn't mute everyone. And so you have all these people who are either first time phone bankers or first time Zoom users. And it just so painful. And I'm like, I literally can't sit through this. It feels like a total waste of time. Yeah. So I would just say, if you want people to have a positive experience and maybe come back, you can't have that sort of disorganized event. And that's what I really liked about your agenda was 5 minutes of welcoming, 5 minutes of, whatever. It was short increments and moving it along. And then most of the time should be spent letting people make phone calls. And if people want to go on and talk, that's not why people showed up, so you have to try to find a way to redirect and stay on message. And I just want to say that's really important as a participant for me. Yeah,
I hear you. And I definitely know I've been at those phone banks and I've run them and made errors in organizing. The other thing I forgot to add is that if you do go with my approach of having multiple volunteers with different roles, especially for a larger event, if you're going to have 30 people or even 20 people, to have multiple volunteers, have them meet the day before, maybe the night before, and they do the confirmation calls together and then do a quick run through of what's going to happen at the event. Goes a long way. Even, making sure you ask people to show up early. So ask them to come at 2:30 if it's a 3 p.m. event. They'll come at 2:45. That's enough time, no problem. But I like that you brought up even those nitty gritty details of people being unmuted, right? What a pain when people join the Zoom and you're making calls and you hear like, "Hi everyone, I'm Hannah. It's my first time making calls. How do I get set up?" And it's not their fault, but that way you can just continue on and you don't have to be bothered. So you have that Zoom host or Zoom maestro who's doing things like that to help the event go smoothly. I think there's lots of little things you can do. Even having that designated person who posts links in the chat. So for instance, as someone, as volunteer A is doing the tech training, volunteer B is posting the login link for the dialer in the chat. That kind of thing makes your volunteers really feel like, wow, I'm at an event that was like planned out specifically for me to have a good experience. And I think it makes a difference for sure.
I also wanted to add that if it is like a smaller event and you're doing it solo and you ask, how many people are new, how many people are returning, and you dedicate the first 10 minutes to do the training, you can go ahead and excuse those people who already know the system, give them the login information at the top, be like, if you know what you're doing, here's the information so you can get calling right away. And I know a lot of people really appreciate that because they don't want to burn 15 minutes or sometimes longer if there's a lot of new people asking questions. 15 minutes that they could be calling, especially if they can't stay for the whole event. They want to make, use of their time. So I found that as we got farther in the election season, I would just start right away with welcoming people. If you already know Hub Dialer, you know what you're doing, here's your login codes, see it, go ahead and mute yourself, have fun, and we'll see you at the debrief.
Totally.
And that was
Totally.
a way to get people to come back too, because I know even when I was participating, I'm like, oh, I don't want to go through a half hour of, not calling. So
absolutely.
Yeah, feel free to do that as well.
Yeah. And I would say like getting feedback on the tech training every single time you do it is really useful too.
Absolutely. Or just
did I
allowing
miss
people to
anything?
vent. Like,
Yeah,
I
totally.
just wanted to say, like, even if it's not, if nobody has troubleshooting questions and tech went really, really well, just be like, does anybody have anything that they need to like get off their chest or something super inspirational? Like I remember one Prop 15 call that one of our LA Forward members had was so inspirational that like it carried me through actually till today. Like it's one of those stories that's just like, she reached a caller who had already voted that did not fully understand what she was voting on. And when it was explained to her, I actually recruited that caller or that voter to advocate to make up for her no vote. She wanted to make sure everyone in her family and her friends were voting yes, because she felt, like she didn't know what she was voting on. So I thought that was like inspirational. That's like, even if you like, it's more than just getting a yes vote, it's kind of creating an advocate. And that is something that fuels me. And if we didn't have the debrief at the end, I would have never heard that story. So I think it's super important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Awesome. Looks like we're cruising past 8:30. And yeah, I really, really appreciate everyone being here. Thank you, Matthew. It's good to have you. I'll stop the recording and stop the screen share. Let me see if I can, let's see. There we go. Yes.